A barbell loaded with weight. Dr. Martine Behrens steps up. She's 64, a grandmother. The weight is 27.5 kilos above the British record. She lifts. New record. She discovered powerlifting unexpectedly. 8 months later, a world champion. Denied A-level maths. Decades later, a reader in statistics. Tell her she can't, and she'll show you she can. The barriers weren't real. I'm Penny Triantafillou, and this is Women Leaders, Tales, Trails, and Truths. Martine, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
First of all, I love that you're wearing your British team kit. Must mean a lot, must be very special to you.
It is, yes, because I had to earn the right to buy this.
And I want to start by taking me to that moment that I just described, stepping at the bar, attempting the 27.5 kilos above the existing British record. What do you remember about that moment? I mean, what was happening? What were you thinking?
Well, I was surrounded, it was a competition, so I was surrounded by an audience who were cheering. Because this was a record attempt, the music was loud, the judges were watching me carefully, the 3 judges, there were spotters around me to catch me if I fell. That's a standard competition setup. But when I touch the barbell, all of those fade into the background, and all I can hear are my cues. Grip the barbell, take a deep breath, brace your back, pull the slack out of the bar, and push the floor away. Up you stand. And then it all comes back into focus as I watch for the judges' acknowledgement that this is a good lift.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're just able to block everything out. Like, were you nervous at all, or were you just in the zone, as they say?
I'm nervous as I'm waiting to go onto the platform. But deadlifting, well, any of the lifts are things that I've done in the gym over and over and over again. So once that moment comes, and it's the same with giving a talk as an academic. So I practice the first line, the first couple of sentences, and I'm nervous before it's my turn. But as soon as I'm on the stage, those 2 sentences, and I'm in the zone and I can do it. So that's not something I've learned or practiced. It's something that just happens.
I love how you draw the parallels between the two. But your story really starts much earlier, because you've said when you deadlifted 60 kilos on your first try, you thought, oh, if I can't do it, it can't be that good. I mean, you believed for years that you weren't good at sport. How did that belief show up in your life?
Well, it was based on evidence. I'd never been picked for teams. I love playing games. I love playing rounders and things, but nobody would have me on their team. I wasn't good enough. When we did athletics and so on at school, in secondary school, all the serious people, the runners and the high jumpers, were all in the main body of the field, and there was just 2 or 3 of us who were sent down into the corner to go and throw discus and javelin as best we could. So this paradigm had reinforced in me that I'm not a sports person. I'm not an athlete. I never will be. But I'm happy to do activity for fun.
I mean, I'm just thinking that idea of believing something about yourself for years is really so powerful. I mean, you've said also that gyms felt intimidating, almost like there was a barrier to entry. What made them feel scary for you? And I'm sure many of our listeners and women would relate.
Well, I think gyms generally are. I mean, very often you can't just walk in. So there's some kind of a gated entry. So, and even if you can see in through the doors and you know, or through the glass front, which is kind of helpful, you've no idea how to use those big black machines. So you really need someone to overcome that with you. It either needs to be an open day, or you need someone to take you, explain, show things around. And of course, everywhere you go, there's an unwritten rule, isn't there? The culture of a place. What do you do if you're doing 3 sets of 10 on a machine? Do you still sit on it whilst you're waiting for your rest period? Do you go up and walk away? What is the culture? What's expected of you? And there's all those unanswered questions that are bubbling around in your mind, just making it feel like a huge deal to walk through the door. And it can be the same for somebody who's walking into a church or walking into a university or walking into any kind of unfamiliar situation, those barriers can be huge.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you mentioned the other context. It could be anything at all. So it's just something that might keep somebody from walking through that door. But what changed for you when you walked through that door, that gym door?
Well, there was a new gym opening. And I thought, well, this is my chance because it'll be my gym as much as everybody else's. I'm not walking into sort of an established community, so that's going to be lower that barrier. And because they were opening, they had lots of open days. So I was able to literally just walk in through the door and somebody would take me on a tour and show me what the machines were. Turns out the machines actually have very helpful pictures on them, showing you how to use them properly and which muscles you're working. So that's very helpful, and even what they're called. And that becomes important if you start tracking your activity, but perhaps on something like the Strong app, because you'll need to know what this exercise is called in order to get it up on the list. So you can say, well, I did this many repetitions at this much weight, and then you can track your progress that way. So those are the things that kind of lowered the barrier. I wanted to go. It was a good while until I actually had the kind of courage and opportunity to really overcome that barrier to entry and actually end up as a gym member for the first time. Yeah.
So interesting, you mentioned the word barriers, and barriers weren't new in your story because much earlier in life, there was another kind of moment like that. I'm talking about how, you were denied access to A-level maths at school. I mean, what exactly happened?
Oh, so I was fairly average for my school at maths, but it was a girls' grammar school. So being average at a girls' grammar school is still being reasonably competent at it. But the penny just kind of dropped for me in terms of math. Something's clicked and made sense in a new way, just as I was coming up to my O-levels, as I was in sort of age 15, 16. And I felt this sudden affinity with it. And I thought, I would like to do this for A-level. But when I spoke to my teachers about A-level selection, they said, if it was more of the same, no problem, but you will not cope with A-level maths. So they advised me strongly against it.
Did you believe them at the time?
Of course, they were my teachers. They should know, right?
So when did you decide to try again?
I was in my early 40s. My youngest child had just graduated up to high school. I was no longer doing the school run in the same way, so I had a little bit of extra time. And having done some voluntary work in schools, I felt that I would quite like to change from being an accountant to being a school teacher. But in order to do that, I needed a degree. And I thought, well, what subject would I like to teach? And the subject I really enjoyed most helping my children with was the maths. But I was also conscious that the syllabus had changed since, the quarter of a century since I did my O-level at this point. And so what I did is I went to my local college and did the GCSE retake year for all the kids who didn't get a C, who got D's and E's and needed a C either for university or it was part of their learning agreement for their guitar course or whatever. So I joined that class. It was during the daytime. It wasn't going to interfere with my children. Term time dates are going to work out. It was a little experiment as to how my study would fit in with family life. And so I did the GCSE retake year, went on to do the A-level. And every time I struggled, I could hear this teacher's voice in my head saying, you won't cope, you won't cope. But I tried. And I persevered and I did cope and I got a good grade and I got into university to do a degree.
That is so impressive. Were you almost thinking, I'll show you that I can cope and I can manage?
Not really. I believed the teacher, but I got to the point. So I had seen in a bookshop a book, and the title of the book was Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Now, I've never read that book, but even seeing the title was a paradigm shift because I'd always thought of fear as an indicator that something was not for you. Okay? And so if I felt afraid, I wouldn't do something. But then I thought, well, if you can feel the fear and do it anyway, well, why not give it a go? And I said, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is I fail. If I fail, I'll be embarrassed, but nothing worse. I've survived embarrassment before. My husband will not divorce me. My children will not disown me. They probably won't even notice. I won't be homeless. Nothing really bad is going to happen. So give it a go.
So it was at that moment where you thought, what do I have to lose? Just give it a go.
Give it a go. And the worst thing that can happen is that you fail and the teacher was right. But you won't know until you try.
That's such a good attitude to have. So you went back to study, first taking the A-level maths, then getting your degree with 3 children, as you say. That's so impressive. And then you became the Director of Applied Statistics and Risk Unit in the Department of Stats right here at Warwick. So that's 2 massive reinventions. Walk me through that journey a bit more if you can.
Certainly. So when I was doing the maths degree, one of the subjects was mathematical modelling. And that's where you describe some part of the world in mathematical terms, and you can predict what's going to happen. So as my head of department used to say, the difference between a mathematician and a fortune teller is the mathematician does not need a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen. And this can apply for the design of roads and junctions to have traffic flow, how to distribute vaccines if not everyone can have one, how you're going to protect as many people as possible. And this was very important, obviously, in the pandemic, wasn't it? So all these kind of things, human immune system, variant CJD was much more of a topic back in the day when I was doing that. We did some modelling around that. Would there be another spike? All these really interesting questions. And I realised for the first time that you can use maths to make people's lives better. And that was a complete paradigm shift. And I kind of fell in love with maths in a brand new way at that point. So that was compulsory 3 years out of 3 for me in my course. And 3 years out of 3, I was top of the year in that topic, because as an adult learner, I had learned not to put my learning into boxes, whereas my young colleagues were still thinking that if you teach it me in this module, and I do the exercise sheet in this module, I don't need to refer to it in another module. But the mathematical modelling required us to pick out all the bits of knowledge that we had from all of the other modules and kind of bring them to bear on the problem at hand. And that was a very different way of thinking. And it does take a little bit of practice. And I think I had a big advantage being an adult learner at that point. But having really loved this, it became clear to me that 3 years was not going to be long enough to study such beautiful subjects. There was so much more to learn. And my course director did say, well, have you looked on jobs.ac.uk? And I hadn't, because I didn't know which it was. And then I found the Complexity Science Doctoral Training Centre here at Warwick. And I thought, oh, that's exactly what I want to do. And so I applied for that, not expecting to get in. So this is somebody who kicked me in the teeth, as it were, or put me down. So I applied for that, and not really expecting them to take any notice of me. But I got an interview. And then one of my lecturers said, well, they probably interview everybody. Okay, fair enough. And I went, and I just really enjoyed it. I felt so at home during the interview process. And then I got an email offering me a place. And I walked downstairs, and my husband saw me and said, oh, what's happened? How did you get down the stairs in that state? And I said, Warwick's offered me a place. He said, are you going to take it? I already have. And I told my lecturers, and they're all very happy for me, except this one who said, you are not Warwick material. You will not cope. Do not go and embarrass us in public. So again, I had somebody saying, you will not cope. But I thought, I'm going to give it a try. If I don't cope, they'll kick me out. But I'm going to give it a crack.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, actually, because just, when you've managed to do so much already and then have that voice, a similar voice from someone in education, saying that, you're not going to make it, that sounds very awful, to be honest with you. So it was just that, again, your attitude of, what's the worst that can happen? Your attitude on failure. I'm going to give it a go.
Absolutely. I just really wanted to do it, and the opportunity was there. So yes, he might be right. And I'm not giving anything away because all my lecturers were male. But, he might be right. But let's see, because I want to do it. I want to do this.
So when you look at your life now, there's an interesting pattern. You've had 2 very different journeys. It took you about 25 years to go from being denied the A-level maths to becoming a reader in statistics, but only 8 months from your first deadlift to becoming a world champion. Why do you think one journey took decades and the other months?
Well, I think the being denied A-level maths set me on a different journey. So I did business studies and I became an accountant. Then I was full-time at home, bringing up 3 boys. So I didn't really pick that up again until my 40s. And then it went as fast as it could have done, because you have to do the GCSE, you have to do the A-level, you have to do the degree, the master's, the PhD. And then I did a postdoc. And it was when I was doing the postdoc and we were working with Warwick County Council on food security, statistical methods for helping to make decisions about that my department, or my immediate supervisor, recognised that not only was I a good academic, but actually I had a really good way with people who were not academics, because I had been a not academic for a long time. So I speak both languages, and having had the background in accountancy, I spoke to a lot of different businesses and understood how different businesses work, what their imperatives are, what their pressures are, what's important to them. So having had that sort of dual capability, if you like, or 2 languages if you want, that translation piece was very good. So when they were reframing the knowledge exchange unit in the Department of Statistics, I was an obvious choice. And I was invited to apply for the post, and I got it.
So glad you did. So did the academic journey prepare you for the athletic one in a way?
In some ways, there's nothing quite like doing a PhD to test your resilience and perseverance, because it's a very bumpy journey for most people. Very rarely does it go straightforwardly. It is genuine research, so we do not know what we're doing. We don't know what we're going to end up with. We always imagine we're going to do more than we actually do. And none of us is ever confident we've done enough to get a PhD. You know, there's still this idea that, well, if I've done it, anybody could have done it idea. It's only when you actually come out of your viva and they say, congratulations, Dr. Barons, that you kind of believe it, that you've actually done enough, because these very clever academics have closely read your work and examined you and all this kind of thing.
So I'm curious, has this journey, especially the powerlifting, changed anything about the way you lead?
I think it does. I think every experience you have accumulates in you to produce added capability, if you let it. If you're a reflective person and you think about your journey and you think about how things you could have done better if you'd known more, but also what lessons you can learn from every stage to take with you forward. I think one thing that strength sports in particular, but sport in general, does give you is a lot of confidence. So you feel capable in your body. You know you can do things, and sometimes you can do things that other people can't do, or you feel you can do things you used to be able to do. So that is a very confidence enhancing experience, and very good. And of course, in my short time in this particular sport, I've travelled all over the world to compete, and everybody runs their competition slightly differently, and it's a little disorientating, but you have to bring your A game in spite of the externals. So again, that's something that you have to learn, and you become that kind of, okay, a steady ship on a rough sea.
I like the way you describe it. Yeah, let's talk about how fast this happened, Martine. 14 weeks after your first deadlift, you entered your first competition and broke a British record. 8 months later, you're representing GB at the World Championships and you win. So what do you remember from that period, and how did it all kind of unfold?
Well, it all started because I had a colleague in the department who was a personal trainer, and I told her that I'd recently joined the gym and I was enjoying, but I wasn't touching the free weights because I didn't want to hurt myself, and not hurting myself is a very high priority for me, because obviously that impacts the rest of your life. And she said, oh, I will teach you how to deadlift. So we eventually got round to it a few months later, and we went to the gym together, and she showed me how to deadlift. And she was astonished that I could deadlift 4 repetitions, 60 kilograms. Now, I had to stop because my hands were getting sore. But I thought, as you said, if I can do it, it must be easy. No, she said, that is really good. And I didn't really believe her, which I should have done because she has expertise, but I didn't. A few weeks later, we went again, and we went to her gym this time. And this time I was able to get as far as 100 kilograms. And she said, no, seriously, you are strong. You should compete. Had no idea you could compete in this stuff. But what do? You go and find out, don't you? And so I found out about powerlifting. Wasn't quite sure what it was, but I got as far as it consists of 3 lifts: the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. And I looked at where there was a competition near me, and there was one at Barbell Training Complex in Warwick, which is very close, just near the hospital on Millers Road. And I thought, oh, that's going to be nice and local. And I was very glad to find you could actually download the data sheet for the individual competitions. So I downloaded this data sheet and had a nice half an hour poring over this spreadsheet, looking what other people were lifting. And although there wasn't actually anybody as old as me actually lifting, they weren't lifting wildly more than I was. So I thought, I'm in the ballpark. I could do this. And so I went back to the office, and a few days later saw my colleague again and said, oh, by the way, I've entered a competition. Now you have to teach me how to bench press and how to squat. So she had said you should compete, but she didn't expect me to take that seriously and come back with her a few days later. Yes, now you need to teach me these things. And she said, oh, that's marvellous. I'll come and support you. And I said, no, you will lift as well. You will compete as well. She had never competed either in powerlifting. So she was a PT, but not a specialist in powerlifting. But yeah, so she's also a competitor now.
That's brilliant. And also just, let's give it a go. That voice inside yourself. Okay, so then what happened?
So we went, and so the competition we actually entered was in Rill. It was a bit further away because that gave us a few extra weeks. So I'd been, as you say, deadlifting for 14 weeks. I'd been bench pressing for 8 weeks and squatting for 6 weeks at the point of my first competition. It was only supposed to be a one-off. It was only supposed to be a one-day, fun day out. I was going to be in North Wales anyway that week visiting families. So it wasn't, a big stretch to go there. And really enjoyed the day. There were ups and downs. I missed a few lifts and I was worried I wasn't going to get a total, but I got one in the end. And so that was really great. And then I had to fill in the forms to claim the British records because the deadlift record had been 120 and I managed 125 on my first competition. So for example, and anyway, in the hotel, woke up the next morning to an email saying, congratulations, you've qualified for the British Single Lift Championships, the British Full Power Championships, and the European Championships. And I was like, oh my word. Well, I've been invited. It would be rude not to go. And at this point, I thought, but I need a coach. So I went back to Barbell Training Complex and I hired Pete Grove as my coach, and he is amazing.
I mean, did you ever imagine representing your country?
Not in a million years. Even at that point, that wasn't really on the radar. Again, I was so new to it. I was still figuring out how the scoring worked and what the culture was and what was expected. The difference between a good lift and a failed lift. All of this was kind of new. And so it's very much a journey of discovery, sort of one step at a time. Let's go and do this. But the number of I was 63 at the time, 63-year-old women competing is not so large as the number of sort of 20 to 35s. So I did come in the British single lifts and in the British full power. I did come top 3, and therefore I was selected to go to the Worlds as a British representative. And the first time I saw my name on the team sheet, the British team sheet, all the feelings: unworthy, excited, humbled, just amazed, astonished. How can this be happening to someone like me? How can it? I'm rubbish at sport, and suddenly there's a sport that loves me back.
And you've said something fascinating, that you're getting younger in your body. What do you mean by that?
That means things like I can get out of bed and straight away touch my toes in the morning. I don't have to warm up.
So flexible.
The range of motion in all of my joints has improved hugely. Obviously, I'm stronger. I'm expecting that my bones are probably stronger too, because lifting weights, doing resistance training is very, very good for your bones. I carry myself differently because my muscles are better toned, and I know how to carry myself, and I know how I have to set my frame when I'm lifting heavy. So that's important. I've learnt how to control the different muscles and to recognize when I'm engaging them, which for somebody with poor proprioception like myself has been a quite a journey to learn, but I'm a lot more confident in my body and that I can do things with my body. It just feels younger. It just feels no aches and pains getting up in the morning, that kind of stuff.
So what do women misunderstand about strength as they age?
I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about. Women will get very bulky and they will look like men and it's very unfeminine and all this kind of thing. But it's actually incredibly hard to create bulk. And probably you have to take performance enhancing drugs to get it to get any significant bulk in your muscles if you're a woman. So it's not going to happen, but you're going to feel great and you're going to look great as well because, toned muscles, big muscles, they are so beautiful. And they're metabolically active, which means you need to eat more, which is never a chore, right? Which is exciting. So there's all sorts of reasons why you'd feel younger. I feel younger.
Mm-hmm. And that I hear that you're saying it carries on to other parts of your life, the confidence, just how you carry yourself, etc.
Yes.
So you're a statistician, someone who connects the dots for a living. So when you look back now, how did you possibly miss the data point about yourself that you are naturally strong?
I think because there was no strength sports in primary or secondary school for me. I mean, bearing in mind this was the 70s. And particularly in a girls' grammar school, I mean, we did gymnastics, we did tennis, we did hockey, and we did rounders in the summer and athletics. There was no gym, and we didn't have any access to strength training of any kind. It wouldn't have been considered ladylike anyway back in those days. So how would I know? I mean, I can look back and say, oh, the fact that when I was on the adventure playground, the thing I loved most of all was the rings and turning upside down on the rings or hanging from the trapeze was an indication that I was probably stronger than average, but I didn't recognise it at the time and nobody else pointed it out to me either. So there are some things that you can look back and say, oh, well, that kind of makes sense now, but it wasn't obvious at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think now that you've discovered it, something interesting has happened with the people around you because you've said something really powerful, that records will be broken, but the people you inspire will change lives. And yeah, what does that ripple effect mean to you?
Well, that's the real legacy, isn't it? The real legacy isn't the records, as I said, because they will be broken. The medals are lovely, but they're on a rack in my bedroom. Who sees them? They hardly ever come out for public viewing. But when I get emails from people I've met in the course of my work sometimes, who said, we were chatting at the other lunchtime when you were visiting us about your powerlifting. Well, I just wanted to let you know I've taken up powerlifting. So women in their older years, sometimes young people. I got a message from a colleague I used to be a student with on LinkedIn saying, by the way, you've inadvertently got me back in the gym. So this was a young man, so I hear so many stories and I've taken people who've been afraid. So a lady who's older than me, she's in her 70s, delightful lady, but she said, I feel like I'm getting weaker because I have a daughter who needs physical support at times and I'm finding pushing her wheelchair harder and harder. And now I took her to the gym, got her over that barrier to entry. Now she's training every week. And she carries on doing that. I went to see colleagues in Australia and there was a lady there whose desk is literally 5 minutes walk from the gym and she had been there for years and never gone to the gym. And she asked me to take her, the chance to have a world champion take you. And now she's going every week.
Wow, how does that make you feel?
That makes me feel that's the real legacy. That's the real legacy.
It's incredible.
Because the ability to make people's lives better, whether it's by mathematical modelling, taking them to the gym, being an example of actually 63 isn't too old to start. Whatever that is, I think that's incredible. I think that the chance to leave the world a better place than you found it is really powerful.
I mean, these stories matter more than the records, I feel like you're saying.
I think they do. I think those are things that are going to be enduring.
So this raises an important question about how change happens. You're influencing systems through your work, bridging academia and industry, and individuals through your powerlifting. Which do you think creates more lasting change?
That's a very difficult question. It depends on how you measure it, I think. So for the individuals who are training and getting stronger and avoiding falls, avoiding osteoporosis, that is a big, big change. But building tools that help people make better decisions, which result in millions of pounds of profit or uplift in funding or whatever, that's a different kind of an impact, I think. And it's very hard to then measure the two things and to say one is better than the other.
So it sounds like you're trying new things has always been a part of who you are, but because this isn't the first time you reinvented yourself. You've tried new things throughout your life, like learning to play piano.
Yes.
At the age of 30, is that correct? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I have a memory of my father playing piano downstairs when I was a little child, and I'd always wanted to play piano, but we were a very poor household financially, and so there was no money for piano lessons. But I got the chance. Somebody was giving away a piano, and I said, please, can I have it? And we weren't actually very well off at that time, but I managed to scrape together enough money for weekly piano lessons. Really enjoyed that learning. But again, there was people saying, well, you'll never be a concert pianist at your age. And you think, well, what's the point? I mean, it's not that, well, sorry, that's not the point. I've wanted to do it. Now I have the opportunity. I'm going to do it. And interestingly, this was when my children were in primary school, and the mums at the school gate, there were about half a dozen who either took up an instrument or restarted learning an instrument after I had done that. Because talking to me, they thought, actually, you don't have to be 5 years old to take up an instrument, or yes, I always wished I could, I had carried on with my violin. And I said to them, well, why don't you go back to it then? And they did. The barriers are in your head. The barriers are not there.
And you've been influencing people, even before you weightlifting, even before you went back to school, even when just taking up the piano. I think that's really inspiring, and it has an effect on people. But I love how you're just, so you're doing a master's degree in your 40s, PhD in your 50s, powerlifting in your 60s. Where does the willingness to keep on trying, where does that come from?
And perhaps I'm just a big kid who likes to play with new toys. I don't know. I mean, I really don't. But I do think, sometimes I just feel like I really want to try this and the opportunity is there. If I didn't do it because I was afraid, which was most of my childhood and young life, actually, I was too scared to do things I wanted to do. But I'm really glad now that I don't, because I, feel the fear and do it anyway. Okay, right. And I've now got lots of evidence of feeling the fear, doing it anyway. It doesn't necessarily lead to failure. It can lead to quite a lot of fun, actually.
And success.
Yeah. So enjoy life, because you only have the one. And I think it would be very sad to end your life or come to a point where those things were no longer possible for you. I think, oh, I always wanted to learn the piano. I always wanted to be good at sport, or I always wanted to push the mathematics, or whatever it happens to be, but you were too scared to try. I think that would lead to a feeling of disappointment.
And I think your 3 sons have such an amazing role model. How do you think it's affected them? Well, seeing their mom doing all these amazing things at any time in her life.
Well, what I hope is, and I think, is that they feel that anytime they want to make a change, they can, because they have a role model. So one runs his own business. One actually had a similar story to mine, in the sense that he was told that being a games concept designer was not a real job. So he spent a lot of time not knowing what else he wanted to do and working in retail, but then did it as a mature student. He found a course, went on it, lectured for a little bit, and then he was headhunted by a games company, and now he's doing what he always wanted to do since he was 14. And he always says, whatever I wanted to do, grow my hair long, get a motorbike, whatever I wanted to do, you always supported me. And I think that's the best accolade a parent could ever have.
Definitely.
Don't you think? And then another, the eldest is a school teacher, and in the leadership team. Yeah, he was born for that job, honestly. Yeah, so they're all living lives where they're very fulfilled, doing what they actually wanted to do, not being afraid to try new things. They're all in good relationships. They've got children and so on. So I think if your child can grow up, hold down a job and a relationship, you've probably done your job as a parent.
Definitely. I mean, they're independent, and that's what your goal is. But I think it's just been brilliant that they've had you as that role model, not letting what people have said define them.
Well, indeed, but they probably don't know any different to this. They've only ever had one experience of childhood and mother. So I imagine we all take that our childhood experiences as the standard.
So Martine, tell us a little bit about, I'm so proud that you're working at the University of Warwick and we get to share your story and experience it firsthand today. Tell us, if you can, a little bit about what you're doing now in your academic world.
So I work principally with graphical models. So they're models, statistical models that you can kind of draw as a picture. The reason they are very powerful is that when you're working with business, government, and industry, which is where I principally work, it's a way of conveying information in a way that does not require the other person to have a degree in mathematics. So kind of my favourite projects of recent years, we were working with the National Archives. They needed a decision support tool for the digital archive. So as you know, archives have been looking after paper and physical artifacts for hundreds of years. They know how to do that. But more and more of the information that they are required to keep as a government archive, quote, forever, has been born digital. It was always an email. It was always an electronic document. It was always some complex object that has multiple attachments on and headers and metadata and so on. How to preserve those was less clear, and everybody's learning as they're going along. What we were able to do was to build them a tool that was able to show that if they did a certain set of actions, the risk to their digital archive was going to change in these ways. So what they were able to do then is to put 3 or 4 different packages that they could enact together and show the difference in the risks to the digital archives. Then in the spending round, they were able to successfully ask for money by putting forward a business case for that. So that was a very exciting project to be involved with. And the current project that's most exciting me is one we're doing with Warwickshire County Council. So along similar lines, it's statistical methods for decision support, but this one's around household food insecurity. So people in the district who are struggling to put food on their table, some people are skipping meals, some children who are going hungry, not doing so well at school, all of the sort of fallout from not having a good, safe access to good quality food for an active and healthy life. So in a similar way, we're gathering the data, we're working out what we're going to do with where the data has gaps and all this kind of thing to put together a similar idea so they can actually say, well, we've only got this much money to spend on this topic, but we can spend it in these 3 different ways. Which one is going to reduce the number of households in food poverty the most? So I'm really excited about that too.
Well, that's really, again, making an impact on people's lives in our area.
Yeah.
Tell us about Australia.
So I have a collaboration with people in Australia because they also work on graphical models, and that's really exciting. And I've been out there now 4 times, so 8-9 weeks at a time usually. I did go recently, was just to be a keynote speaker, so I was only out there for a week, which was a little bit short, to be honest, for such a long journey. But my PhD student was also out there for a longer spell of time. So one of the first things I worked on there was the bees. So again, we need pollination services as part of our food security. And we know that in recent years there have been a decline in the number of insect pollinators, that we need to do something about this. But then, we now have a national pollinator strategy, but we didn't when we first started working on this. And Australia, the more recent work in Australia was about, they've recently had the varroa mite incursion into Australia, where they were free from varroa mite for a long, long time, and their border security kept that very strong, but they had an incursion. They've never had it before. What do they now do to stop it becoming endemic? Because a lot of the honey industry relies on the fact that they're free from chemicals. So honey that's produced in our country, because we do have the varroa mite endemically, then they have to put miticides in the hives at the right time of year to keep the mite levels low enough so that the colonies can thrive and produce the honey. But you can't say it's completely free from chemicals because the miticides need to support the colonies. But Australia obviously would like to preserve its free from status because that honey has a much higher economic value So how do they go about containing, since they've failed to eradicate, containing the varroa mite and producing good quality honey? So lots and lots of exciting different kinds of jobs to work out. There's a saying, isn't there, that statisticians have fun because they get to play in everybody else's backyard.
Well, it sure sounds like you're having fun and making an impact. And this is a world that's so different to your powerlifting. It's just brilliant that you're making such an impact. And I know that you also give talks.
Yes.
And you engage with the public. Is there one that you're particularly proud of that you can share with us?
Yes, saving the bees with maths.
Okay, tell us more about
with data
that.
science. Yeah, so I have versions of this talk which I can do to specialist sixth form maths school or
nice.
down to a primary school, and it's a talk that often goes down well because it's very interactive. People have a lot of good general knowledge about that, so we can draw out from the audience all the different factors. And I can show them how to draw it into a graphical model without having to teach them the maths behind. But for the sixth form specialists, I would actually then list the work behind. And so we can do that. And again, it's a way of showing that actually this maths that you're learning at school, it can have a real impact on things that we care about. The environment is so important. If we can do the mathematics, we can actually work out if we do this, then this will happen, or if we do that, then that will happen. And so we know which pathway to follow.
We're coming to the close of the podcast, and I wanted to ask you, this podcast is called Women Leaders, Tales, Trails, and Truths. What's the truth you want women to take away from your story?
I think the truth is that you have one life. You want to look back and enjoy the memories. So, as I've said probably too many times, if you have the opportunity and you want it, go for it.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here, Martine. And we're all rooting for you. I know you've got some big competitions coming up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Completely inspired. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.